A poor single dad helps a woman fix her car, thinking she's just another stranded driver. But what he doesn't know? She's a billionaire, hiding her identity, searching for real love. Drawn to his kindness, she returns, but their growing bond is built on a secret. And when her ruthless stepbrother uncovers the truth, he's determined to destroy everything. When the secret is exposed, will love survive the betrayal, or will pride and power tear them apart? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Nate Harmon's alarm blared at 4:45 a.m. as it did every weekday. He silenced it with a practiced swipe, his calloused fingers finding the button in the dark. For a moment, he allowed himself to sink back into the pillow, the weight of exhaustion pulling at him like gravity. 3 years as a single dad had taught him to savor these fleeting seconds of peace. 5, 4, 3, 2. He counted down under his breath before swinging his legs over the edge of the bed. No time for self-pity. Lily needed breakfast. By 5:30, he stood in his daughter's doorway. Lily was curled around her stuffed elephant, wild curls splayed across her pillow. "Rise and shine, kiddo," he called softly. "School day." Lily groaned, burrowing deeper under her blanket. "5 more minutes, Daddy." "That's what you said yesterday, and we were late," Nate reminded her, flipping on the light. "Pancakes are getting cold." At the mention of pancakes, one brown eye peeked out. "Blueberry. Is there any other kind on Tuesdays?" Nate winked. The morning routine unfolded with practiced efficiency. Breakfast eaten, teeth brushed, hair hastily braided, though never quite as neatly as her mother used to do it. By 6:45, they were in his weathered pickup truck, heater struggling against the winter chill as they headed to Mrs. Peterson's house. The elderly neighbor watched Lily before school in exchange for free oil changes and the occasional casserole. "Don't forget, I have show and tell today," Lily reminded him, clutching her backpack. Inside was the carburetor they'd cleaned together over the weekend, her pride and joy. "You'll knock 'em dead, sweetheart." Nate ruffled her hair. "Just remember, don't use the words you say when you hit your thumb with a hammer," she finished with a gap-toothed grin. By 7:15, Nate unlocked Harmon Auto Repair, flipping on lights that buzzed reluctantly to life. The familiar smells of motor oil, rubber, and metal greeted him like old friends. Before customers arrived, he reviewed the day's appointments in his dog-eared ledger. The Rodriguez family needed their minivan back today, but he was still waiting on parts. The Wilsons were 3 weeks late on payment, and Mrs. Abernathy would certainly bring cookies with her oil change, insisting he was too skinny. The day passed in a blur of grease, metal, and calculations, trying to stretch dollars that wouldn't stretch. At 2:30, he cleaned up as best he could to pick up Lily from school, ignoring the curious glances from soccer moms as he stood among them in his stained coveralls. "Daddy, I got a gold star for my carburetor." Lily launched herself into his arms, waving a paper with a bright sticker. "That's my girl," he said, his chest swelling with pride as he carried her to the truck. "How about you help me with the Rodriguez van this afternoon?" Back at the shop, Lily sat on her designated stool, supervising while coloring and occasionally handing him tools. Outside, snow began to fall in thick, lazy flakes. By 6:30, with the Rodriguez van finally fixed and Lily's homework spread across his office desk, Nate was eyeing the clock. 15 minutes until closing, then home for spaghetti and maybe, if he wasn't too exhausted, one chapter of the book they were reading together. That's when he heard it. The distinctive purr of a luxury engine, followed by the crunch of tires on fresh snow. Nate sighed, wiping his hands on a rag as he stepped outside. A sleek black Audi had pulled up, its headlights cutting through the swirling snow. The driver's door opened, and a woman emerged, her elegant silhouette a stark contrast to the utilitarian surroundings of his shop. "I'm so sorry to come just as you're closing," she called, her voice clear in the quiet evening. "But my car started making this terrible noise, and yours was the only shop with lights still on." "Let's take a look," Nate said, professional instinct overriding his fatigue. "I'm Nate Harmon." "Rosie Smith," she replied, extending a gloved hand. "I can't tell you how grateful I am." Under the hood, Nate quickly spotted the issue, a loose belt, simple enough to fix. As he explained the problem, he was surprised by her genuine interest. "Could you show me exactly where?" Rosie asked, leaning in beside him. "I've always wanted to understand how engines work." Her shoulder brushed against his as she peered into the engine compartment. The scent of her perfume, something subtle and expensive, mingled with the familiar shop smells. "Right here," Nate guided her hand to the belt. Their fingers touched briefly as he showed her the tension pulley, and something electric passed between them, a spark that had nothing to do with the car's mechanics. Nate cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "It's an easy fix. Give me 5 minutes." When he finished, Rosie reached for her purse. "What do I owe you?" Nate hesitated. It had been a simple repair, but even a small payment would help with groceries this week. Yet something made him shake his head. "Nothing. Just being neighborly." "Are you sure?" Her blue eyes studied him with surprising intensity. "Positive. Just drive safely in this snow." As Rosie pulled away, her taillights glowing red against the white landscape, Nate stood watching longer than necessary. Lily appeared at his side, slipping her small hand into his. "She was pretty," Lily observed matter-of-factly. "Was she?" Nate pretended not to have noticed, though the woman's smile had already etched itself into his memory, the first to catch his attention since losing his wife 3 years ago. "Daddy, you're not fooling anyone," Lily said with all the wisdom of her 8 years. "Your ears are red." Next day, the opulent boardroom of Blackwell Industries gleamed with polished mahogany and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the city skyline. Rosalind Blackwell sat at the table's center, her tailored navy suit and understated pearl earrings, a stark contrast to the woman who had stood in the snow at Harmon's Auto Repair just days before. "The Henderson acquisition shows promising fourth-quarter projections," she stated, sliding financial reports across the table. "Their sustainability initiatives align perfectly with our new corporate direction." Around her, board members nodded approvingly. Only Vincent Blackwell, her stepbrother, remained expressionless, his manicured fingers tapping rhythmically against his leather portfolio. "Excellent presentation, Rosalind," the CFO commented as the meeting adjourned. "Your mother would be proud." Vincent lingered as others filed out, his cologne announcing his approach before he reached her side. "Where did you disappear to on Tuesday evening? The Morrisons were asking about you at the foundation gala." Rosie gathered her papers, avoiding his penetrating gaze. "I had a migraine. Needed some fresh air." "In the industrial district?" Vincent's voice remained pleasant, but his eyes hardened. "That's an unusual place to seek fresh air." Rosie's hand stilled momentarily. "I wasn't aware my car was being tracked." "It's not." Vincent smiled thinly. "But your security detail is concerned when you dismiss them and vanish for hours." Before she could respond, her assistant appeared at the doorway. "Ms. Blackwell, your charity luncheon begins in 30 minutes." "Thank you, Mia." Rosie seized the interruption gratefully. "We'll continue this later, Vincent." In the elevator, Rosie exhaled deeply as Mia handed her a tablet with the luncheon details. "Rough meeting?" Mia asked, her voice lowered despite their privacy. "Vincent's keeping tabs on me again." Rosie scrolled through the guest list, grimacing at the familiar names. "Let me guess, Richard Tompkins will be seated next to me." "His father's foundation donated $2 million last quarter," Mia confirmed apologetically. "And coincidentally, Richard is newly single." Rosie leaned against the elevator wall. "I'm so tired of being sized up like a prize thoroughbred, Mia. Last week, Carlton Peters spent our entire dinner explaining how he could optimize the Blackwell portfolio. He didn't even ask about your Harvard business degree. Why would he? He assumed I'm just a figurehead. The elevator doors opened to the private garage where her driver waited. They all do. Later that evening, alone in her penthouse, Rosie held a wrench in her manicured hands. She'd spent an hour watching tutorials on how to loosen a specific belt in her Audi's engine, just enough to cause a concerning noise without damaging anything. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, but continued anyway. The following afternoon, Rosie drove her purposely troubled Audi toward Harmon's Auto Repair, her heart beating faster as the familiar sign came into view. She'd swapped her designer clothes for jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. When she entered the waiting area, the scene before her made her pause. Nate sat beside Lily at a small table, his large hand gently guiding hers as they worked through math problems. 7 times 8 is... Nate prompted. Lily's face scrunched in concentration. 56? That's right. Nate's proud smile transformed his tired face. See? You've got this. Rosie watched, transfixed by the tenderness between them. When Nate finally looked up and noticed her, surprise and something warmer flickered across his features. "Ms. Smith," he said, standing. "Car trouble again?" "Please call me Rosie," she replied. "And yes, unfortunately, it's making that noise again." Nate wiped his hands on a rag. "Lily, finish these last 2 problems while I check on Rosie's car." Outside, Nate quickly identified the loose belt. "This is odd. It's the same issue as before." Rosie feigned confusion. "Really? How strange." As he worked, their conversation flowed naturally, about the neighborhood, about Lily's school project on engines, about the unseasonably cold weather. Rosie found herself laughing more genuinely than she had in months. When he finished, Nate hesitated before closing the hood. "There's a decent coffee shop next door. If you're not in a rush, maybe we could grab a cup, as a thank you for your patience." The invitation surprised them both. Nate looked as if he couldn't believe the words had left his mouth. "I'd like that," Rosie said, warmth spreading through her chest. The coffee shop was modest but cozy. Lily colored contentedly with crayons provided by the barista, while Nate and Rosie sat across from each other, steam rising from their mugs. "So, what do you do, Rosie Smith?" Nate asked. The question landed like a weight. "I work in corporate finance," she said, the partial truth sticking in her throat. "Sounds complicated." "Sometimes. But your work, fixing things, creating real solutions, that seems more worthwhile." Nate laughed. "Not according to my bank account." "Money isn't everything," Rosie said, then winced at how privileged that must sound. "Says someone who drives an Audi," Nate teased, but without malice. Their conversation deepened as they discovered shared values, a love of classic films, a preference for substance over flash, a belief in hard work. With each revelation, Rosie felt both closer to Nate and more troubled by her deception. When Lily interrupted to show them her drawing of Nate's garage, complete with stick figures of all 3 of them, Rosie felt a pang of longing for something she'd never had. Simplicity, authenticity, connection. Later that evening, Nate's key rattled in the lock of apartment 3B. The hallway light flickered as it always did, casting uneven shadows across the worn carpet. Inside, their 2-bedroom apartment welcomed them with familiar comfort despite its limitations. "Home sweet home, Lilypad," Nate said, setting down his toolbox. The apartment was modest but meticulously maintained. A small living room with a second-hand couch faced a TV that Nate had repaired himself. The kitchen was barely large enough for the 2 of them, with mismatched appliances that worked through Nate's mechanical persistence rather than reliability. Photos of Lily's mother adorned one wall, a deliberate memorial that kept her presence alive for their daughter. "Can I have mac and cheese tonight, Dad?" Lily asked, already pulling out her homework folder. You had that yesterday, Nate reminded her, opening their refrigerator to survey the limited options. But Miss Rosie said mac and cheese is her favorite too. Nate paused. Did she? Uh-huh. She told me when you were fixing her car. Lily spread her math worksheet on the small kitchen table. Do you think Miss Rosie knows how to braid hair? My friend Emma's mom does these super cool braids with ribbons. I don't know, sweetheart. Nate pulled out ingredients for spaghetti. I'm getting better at braids, aren't I? You try really hard, Lily said diplomatically, making Nate smile despite himself. As he cooked, Lily continued. Miss Rosie smells like flowers, and she didn't talk to me like I'm a baby. She asked about my science project and everything. Nate realized with a start that he'd mentioned Rosie several times over dinner the past few days. Now Lily was doing the same. The woman had somehow slipped into their conversations as naturally as she'd slipped into their lives. Dad, are we going to see Miss Rosie again? The question hung in the air as Nate stirred the pasta sauce. I don't know, Lily. She's probably very busy. You should invite her over. I could show her my car drawings. Nate didn't answer, but the thought lingered as they ate dinner and later as he tucked Lily into bed beneath her faded constellation ceiling stickers. Next day across town, crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across the Blackwell Foundation's annual gala. Rosie stood in a midnight blue gown that had cost more than Nate's monthly rent, nodding politely as the mayor's wife detailed her recent yacht purchase. Rosalind, darling, a voice purred from behind. Richard's been looking for you. Rosie turned to see Claudia Westfield, a board member's wife and notorious matchmaker. I've been right here, Claudia. Well, he's secured a table for the Maldives charity auction next month and hoped you'd accompany him. How thoughtful, Rosie said without enthusiasm. Her mind drifted to the coffee shop next to Nate's garage, where the conversations had substance and warmth. You seem distracted tonight, Claudia observed. Is everything all right? Just tired from the Thompson merger, Rosie lied smoothly. Across the room, Vincent watched her, his eyes narrowed as she checked her phone for the third time that hour. When Rosie excused herself moments later, he followed her to a quieter alcove. Who keeps texting you? He asked without preamble. Rosie slipped her phone into her clutch. Work never stops, Vincent. Funny, because I checked with Mia. There are no urgent matters requiring your attention tonight. Are you monitoring my assistant now? Rosie kept her voice level despite her anger. I'm concerned. You've been disappearing for hours, canceling meetings. It's not like you. Perhaps I'm finally taking your advice to live a little, she countered, walking away before he could respond. The next afternoon, Rosie drove to Riverside Park, her heart racing as she spotted Nate and Lily exactly where the receptionist at Lily's school had mentioned they might be. Information obtained through a carefully casual question about weekend activities for children. She approached the playground where Nate sat on a bench watching Lily climb. Pretending surprise, she called out, Nate? Lily? Nate turned, his expression shifting from surprise to pleasure. Rosie? What are you doing here? Just enjoying the weather, she said, gesturing to the clear autumn sky. What a coincidence. Miss Rosie! Lily squealed, abandoning the monkey bars to race toward her. Dad, can Miss Rosie come feed ducks with us? Nate looked between his excited daughter and Rosie's hopeful face. Only if she wants to. I'd love to, Rosie said sincerely. The afternoon unfolded with an ease that surprised them all. They threw bread to eager ducks, Lily giggling as the birds quacked demandingly. Later, Nate bought ice cream from a vendor, apologizing that it wasn't anything fancy. This is perfect, Rosie assured him, licking vanilla ice cream before it dripped onto her fingers. For once, she didn't care about appearances or pretense. As the sun began its descent, Lily ran to join some children on the swings. Nate and Rosie sat on a bench watching her, their shoulders touching lightly. She really likes you, Nate said quietly. I really like her, Rosie replied. Both of you, actually. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Nate's hand moved slightly, his pinky finger brushing against hers on the bench. Neither pulled away. This is nice, he said simply, watching his daughter laugh as she soared on the swing. Rosie felt a lump form in her throat. It is. As they sat in comfortable silence, their shoulders touching and fingers barely intertwined, Rosie realized with both joy and trepidation that she was falling for this small, perfect family, a complication her carefully compartmentalized life had never prepared her for. Meanwhile, Vincent drummed his manicured fingers against his desk, eyes fixed on the dossier before him. Are you certain about this? He asked the private investigator, a thin man with a perpetual squint. Absolutely, Mr. Blackwell. Ms. Blackwell has visited this auto shop 6 times in the past 3 weeks. She spends considerable time there, often without any apparent car issues. The investigator slid several photographs across the desk. She's also been seen with the owner and his daughter at parks, a diner, and once at a community fair. Vincent studied the images, Rosie laughing with a rugged-looking man in oil-stained coveralls, helping a small girl feed ducks, sitting on a bench with unmistakable intimacy in their posture. Who is he? Nathan Harmon, widower, 1 daughter. Runs a small auto repair shop downtown. No criminal record. Honorable discharge from the Army where he served as a mechanic. Currently struggling financially based on our assessment. Vincent's lips curled into a cold smile. A mechanic. How quaint. He closed the folder. You've done well. I'll take it from here. Nate stared at the letter in his hands, reading it for the 4th time as if the words might somehow change. 60 days notice, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. The bell above the door jingled, and Nate quickly folded the letter into his pocket. Mrs. Rodriguez, 82 years old and driving the same Buick she'd had for 20 years, shuffled in. Nate, Carino, that noise is back, she said, pressing a small container into his hands. Tamales for you and Lily. You didn't have to bring food, Mrs. Rodriguez. Nonsense. You fixed my car last time and barely charged me. My grandson says you're too nice for business. Nate smiled despite his worries. Let me take a look. He popped the hood of her ancient Buick, already knowing the problem was the timing belt beginning to wear. It needed replacement, a job that would cost several $100s in parts alone. It's just a minor adjustment, he lied gently, working quickly to make a temporary fix. Should hold you for a while. What do I owe you? Those tamales smell amazing. We'll call it even. Mrs. Rodriguez patted his cheek. Your wife would be proud of the man you are. After she left, Nate leaned against the workbench, the weight of the letter heavy in his pocket. When Rosie arrived later that afternoon, she immediately sensed something was wrong. Nate's smile didn't reach his eyes, and his shoulders carried a tension she hadn't seen before. What's happened? She asked directly when they were alone in the garage. Nate hesitated, then pulled the crumpled letter from his pocket. Got this yesterday. The building's been sold to some development company. They're terminating all leases in 60 days. Rosie took the letter, her stomach tightening as she read. Phoenix Development Holdings. Can they do this? Legally, yes. The new owner has plans that don't include a low-yield auto repair shop, he quoted bitterly. I've been here 7 years. Built everything from nothing after. He trailed off, gesturing vaguely to the framed photo of his late wife on his desk. There must be something. I've looked into other locations, but commercial rents have skyrocketed. I'd need triple my current income just to afford the security deposit. He shook his head. I don't know what I'm going to tell Lily. Rosie's heart ached watching him, proud yet vulnerable, worried yet determined. You'll figure it out. You're resourceful. I have to, he said simply. This shop is all we have. Next morning, back at Blackwell Industries, Rosie sat in her expansive office, the contrast to Nate's modest garage almost painful. She pulled up the company's recent acquisitions on her computer, scrolling through dozens of properties purchased through subsidiaries. Then she found it. Phoenix Development Holdings, a shell company 3 layers removed from Blackwell's main operations. Her blood ran cold as she opened the file and saw the downtown redevelopment project, including Nate's building, scheduled for demolition next quarter. A note in the margin read, "VB Priority Project. Expedite all vacancies." Vincent, of course. Rosie picked up her phone, dialing the real estate division. "This is Rosalind Blackwell. I need information on the downtown redevelopment project, specifically the auto shop property on Maple Street." "Ms. Blackwell, that acquisition was personally overseen by Mr. Vincent Blackwell. He's marked it as strategic priority. I want to review the plans. There may be alternatives to full demolition. I would need Mr. Blackwell's approval to share those files." Rosie's grip tightened on the phone. "I'm a principal shareholder in this company." "Yes, Ms. Blackwell, but Mr. Vincent left specific instructions. Perhaps you could discuss it with him directly." After hanging up, Rosie stared out her window at the city below. Somewhere down there, Nate was fighting to save his livelihood, unaware that the very woman he was growing close to was part of the machine threatening to destroy it. She had to fix this without revealing who she really was. But Vincent had outmaneuvered her, ensuring she couldn't simply override his decision without exposing her deception to Nate. For the first time, Rosie's carefully separated worlds were colliding catastrophically. Nate spread the real estate listings across his kitchen table, circling figures that made his stomach sink. Every available commercial space cost at least twice his current rent, with security deposits he couldn't possibly afford. He'd been at this for hours, and the options were dwindling with each passing day. "Daddy, is Miss Rosie coming over soon?" Lily called from the living room floor where she'd arranged her science project materials in neat piles. "Should be here any minute, kiddo," Nate replied, hastily folding the listings and tucking them beneath a stack of bills. No need to let his daughter see his growing desperation. The doorbell rang, and Lily sprinted to answer it, her socked feet sliding across the worn linoleum. "Wait for me to check who it is first," Nate called, but Lily had already flung the door open. "Miss Rosie," she exclaimed, "I got all the stuff ready. Dad bought batteries and wires, and I found a shoebox for the base." Rosie stood in the doorway, her simple jeans and sweater a stark contrast to the designer clothes hanging in her other life's closet. She carried a bag of additional supplies and wore a genuine smile that warmed Nate from across the room. "I brought some extra materials," she said, stepping inside their modest apartment. Her eyes took in the space, small but tidy, with mismatched furniture and walls decorated with Lily's artwork. "Hope that's okay." "More than okay," Nate said. "You're saving me from having to figure out how to build an electric car. Engines, I understand. Tiny science project motors? Not so much." For the next few hours, their world narrowed to the living room floor, where the three of them huddled around cardboard, wires, and tiny motors. Rosie patiently explained electrical circuits to Lily, who absorbed every word with wide-eyed fascination. "You're really good at this," Nate observed, as Rosie helped Lily attach the motor to the makeshift axle. "I had a tutor who taught me engineering basics when I was about Lily's age," Rosie said, the memory bittersweet. "My parents were too busy to help with school projects." "Well, I'm here," Nate said, "just completely useless with this particular skill set." Rosie laughed. "You're providing moral support and pizza, essential services." When Lily's car successfully moved across the floor on its own power, her triumphant cheer filled the small apartment. She threw her arms around Rosie's neck in an impulsive hug that made Rosie's eyes glisten. "We did it!" "Wait till Ms. Wilson sees this," Lily exclaimed. Later, after pizza and ice cream, Lily's energy finally waned. Nate tucked her into bed, returning to find Rosie standing on the small balcony that overlooked a quiet street lined with leafless trees. "She's out like a light," he said, joining her. "Science is apparently exhausting." "She's amazing," Rosie said softly. "You've done an incredible job with her." The night air was cool, the sky surprisingly clear for the city, with stars visible between scattered clouds. Nate offered Rosie his jacket, which she accepted gratefully. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough," he admitted, his voice low. "After Sarah died, I promised I'd give Lily everything she needed. Now I might lose the shop, and then what? It was Sarah's dream too, you know. We started it together." Rosie turned to face him. "How did you meet her?" "Engineering school. She was brilliant, could solve problems I'd spend days on in minutes." His smile was sad but genuine. "When she got sick, we'd already put everything into the shop, the medical bills." He shook his head. "But she made me promise to keep it going for Lily." "You've honored that promise beautifully," Rosie said, her hand finding his on the railing. "What about you?" Nate asked. "You know all my sad stories now." Rosie looked up at the stars, choosing her words carefully. "I grew up with privilege," she said finally. "But it came with expectations. People didn't see me. They saw what my family represented, what I could do for them." She swallowed hard. "I spent my childhood trying to prove I was worth something beyond my family name." It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. "Is that why you know so much about cars, rebelling against expectations?" Nate asked. Rosie smiled. "Something like that." They stood in comfortable silence, shoulders touching, until Nate turned toward her. The moonlight caught in her hair, and he reached up to brush a strand from her face. "I haven't felt this way in a long time," he whispered. "It scares me." "Me too," she admitted. When he leaned down to kiss her, it felt inevitable, like gravity pulling them together. His lips were gentle, questioning, and then more certain as she responded. His hand cradled her face as if she were something precious, and Rosie felt the weight of her deception like a stone in her chest, even as her heart soared. They pulled apart slowly, both breathless, both aware that something fundamental had shifted between them. "Nate, she began, the truth pushing against her lips. "It's okay," he said, misunderstanding her hesitation. "We can take this slow." Rosie nodded, the moment to confess slipping away as he pulled her close again under the vast, indifferent stars. The cough started on a Tuesday. By Thursday night, Lily's fever had spiked to 103, and her breathing came in shallow, painful gasps. Nate paced the emergency room, his face ashen under the harsh fluorescent lights as doctors spoke of pneumonia and possible complications. "She needs to be admitted," the doctor said. "Her oxygen levels are concerning." Nate nodded numbly, watching as they wheeled his daughter away. The insurance paperwork in his hand might as well have been written in a foreign language. His eyes burned from lack of sleep, his clothes rumpled from 2 days of wear. By Saturday morning, Nate hadn't left the hospital. He sat in the pediatric ward's waiting room, head in his hands, when a gentle touch on his shoulder startled him. "Rosie?" His voice cracked. She stood before him, carrying a duffel bag and a tray of coffee. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, but her presence was like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. "I went by the shop. Miguel told me what happened." She set down her things and wrapped her arms around him. "How is she?" "Not good." His body sagged against hers. "They're talking about specialized treatment, something about her immune response being unusual. The insurance ... He trailed off, the weight of it crushing him. "Have you eaten?" "Slept?" Rosie asked, already knowing the answer. He shook his head. "I can't leave her." "Then I'll stay too," Rosie said simply. Over the next 3 days, Rosie became a fixture in Lily's hospital room. She brought fresh clothes for Nate, real food instead of vending machine dinners, and most importantly, a calm presence that anchored them both. For Lily, she brought books and told elaborate stories about princesses who fixed their own carriages and rescued princes with clever inventions. And then the princess realized the dragon wasn't mean at all, Rosie was saying, perched on the edge of Lily's bed, when Nate returned from speaking with the doctors. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly. "What is it, Daddy?" Lily asked, her voice thin beneath the oxygen mask. "Just boring grown-up talk," he said, forcing a smile. "How's the princess doing with that dragon?" Later in the hallway, he broke down. "They want to try an experimental treatment. My insurance won't cover it. It's $30,000, Rosie. I can't." Rosie held him as his shoulders shook. "We'll figure it out," she promised. "Lily will get what she needs." The next morning, Nate was called to meet with the hospital administrator. Confused and fearing the worst, he was instead informed that Lily had been accepted into a specialized treatment program. All expenses would be covered. "There must be some mistake," Nate said, bewildered. "No mistake, Mr. Harmon. Your daughter's case was reviewed by Dr. Abernathy himself. He's flying in tomorrow specifically to oversee her treatment." Nate returned to Lily's room in a daze. "Did you know about this?" he asked Rosie. She smiled, relief evident in her eyes. Sometimes miracles happen. What Nate didn't see was the call Rosie had made at dawn, using her Blackwell connections to arrange for the country's top pediatric immunologist to take Lily's case, with all costs quietly absorbed by a Blackwell Foundation grant. Across the street from the hospital, a man with a telephoto lens captured image after image. Rosie holding Nate as he wept, Rosie reading to Lily, Rosie sleeping in the uncomfortable chair, her hand still holding Lily's. 3 days later, Vincent Blackwell spread these photos across his desk, his jaw tight with displeasure. "How long has this been going on?" he demanded of the investigator. "Weeks, sir. Ms. Blackwell visits them regularly. The man owns an auto repair shop, the same one scheduled for demolition in your East Side development." Vincent studied a particularly damning image. Rosie kissing Nate's forehead as he slept beside Lily's hospital bed, her expression tender and unguarded. "This is becoming a problem," Vincent said coldly. "A serious problem." Days have passed, and as Lily's health improved, the hospital room transformed from a place of anxiety to one of tentative hope. After a week of the specialized treatment, her fever broke, and her breathing eased. The color returned to her cheeks, and with it, her spirited personality. "When can I go home?" she asked the doctor during morning rounds, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "Soon," Dr. Abernathy promised with a smile. "You're making remarkable progress." 2 days later, Lily was discharged with medication and follow-up appointments scheduled. When they arrived home, Nate carried his daughter into their apartment while Rosie followed with bags of supplies. "It feels like forever since I've been here," Lily said, looking around their modest living room with newfound appreciation. "The place missed you," Nate replied, kissing the top of her head. In the days that followed, Rosie became even more integrated into their lives. She brought groceries, helped with Lily's homework, and spent evenings with them watching movies or playing board games. The natural ease between them grew, blossoming into something that none of them had expected, but all cherished. When Saturday arrived, Lily bounced with excitement. "Don't forget, Daddy, I'm going to Emma's birthday party today." "How could I forget?" Nate laughed. "You've been talking about it all week." Emma's mother had arranged for Lily to stay for a sleepover after the party, her first since getting sick. Nate had hesitated initially, but the doctor had cleared Lily for normal activities, and he couldn't deny her this joy. After dropping Lily off, Nate returned to find Rosie waiting at his apartment. "So," she said with a playful smile, "we have a whole day to ourselves. What should we do?" "I have some ideas," Nate replied, taking her hand. "Let me show you my city, not the one in tourist brochures." They spent the day exploring places meaningful to Nate. The small hilltop park where he'd proposed to his late wife. The hidden bookstore where he found engineering manuals. The community garage where he'd first learned to rebuild engines as a teenager. "This is where I come when I need to think," he said, leading her to a quiet spot by the river, away from the popular paths. The water sparkled in the afternoon sun, the city skyline visible but distant. "It's beautiful," Rosie said, leaning against him. "Thank you for sharing these places with me." "They're just ordinary spots," he said, suddenly self-conscious. "No," she touched his face, turning him toward her. "They're pieces of you. That makes them special." Their kiss began gently, but quickly deepened with weeks of growing desire. His hands tangled in her hair as she pressed against him, both breathless when they finally pulled apart. "I never expected you," Nate whispered against her lips. "Neither did I," she admitted, her eyes shining with emotion and something else. A shadow of guilt that Nate didn't notice as he kissed her again. They spent the afternoon talking, sharing stories and dreams. Nate spoke of his hopes for expanding the shop someday, creating a place where Lily could work alongside him if she wanted. Rosie listened, her heart aching with the knowledge of her deception. "I should tell him," she thought, as they walked hand in hand at sunset. "Tonight. I'll tell him everything tonight." But that opportunity vanished when Rosie returned to her penthouse to change clothes before meeting Nate for dinner. Vincent stood waiting in her living room, a folder in his hands. "Working on your charity cases personally now?" he asked, his voice deceptively casual as he tossed the folder onto her coffee table. Photographs spilled out, Rosie and Nate at the hospital, at the park, by the river. "You had me followed?" Rosie's voice shook with anger. "I protect our interests," Vincent replied coldly, "and this mechanic is definitely not in our interest. My personal life is none of your business." "It is when you're jeopardizing $1 billion development." Vincent's facade of calm cracked. "What exactly is your plan here, Rosalind? Slumming with some widower and his brat until you get bored?" Rosie's hand connected with Vincent's cheek before she could stop herself. "Don't you dare talk about them that way." Vincent grabbed her wrist, his eyes flashing. "Let me make this clear. End this now, or I'll make sure your gold digger never works in this city again. I'll crush his little shop and his reputation. Every garage, every supplier will blacklist him." "You wouldn't try me." Vincent's smile was cruel. "One call is all it takes. Choose, Rosalind, your little fantasy or his livelihood." Rosie stood frozen, the impossible choice before her. The love growing between her and Nate, or his ability to provide for himself and Lily. That evening, after a day that had filled Nate with hope for the future, he collapsed onto his worn couch with a contented sigh. The apartment felt empty without Lily's chatter, but he welcomed the rare quiet. He flicked on the local news, half listening as he scrolled through his phone, smiling at the photos he'd taken with Rosie by the river. The news anchor's voice suddenly cut through his thoughts. Blackwell Industries announced a major downtown development project today, with CEO Vincent Blackwell and heiress Rosalind Blackwell presenting plans for... Nate's head snapped up. There on the screen, dressed in an elegant blue dress that highlighted her eyes, stood Rosie, except the caption beneath her read, "Rosalind Blackwell, Blackwell Industries heiress." What the hell? Nate sat up straight, remote control falling from his hand. The woman speaking confidently to reporters about community investment and urban renewal looked exactly like his Rosie, but polished, sophisticated, wealthy beyond imagination. His phone buzzed. Rosie's name appeared on the screen. He stared at it, unable to move as the pieces clicked together. The luxury car, the soft hands that had never done real labor, the way she always seemed to have time in the middle of workdays, the anonymous donor who paid for Lily's specialized treatment. The phone continued buzzing, but Nate couldn't bring himself to answer. He turned it off and sat in the darkness, the television's glow illuminating his stunned face. The next morning, Nate moved through the shop like a ghost. He'd barely slept, his mind replaying every moment with Rosie, or Rosalind, searching for clues he'd missed, wondering what game she'd been playing. When the shop door chimed just after noon, he knew who it was before he turned around. Rosie stood there, dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, but Nate now saw what he'd been blind to before. The quality of her casual clothes, the designer watch, the perfect haircut that probably cost more than his monthly rent. "Nate," she said, her voice small, "please let me explain." He wiped his hands on a rag, painfully aware of the grease under his fingernails, the worn concrete floor beneath his feet, the peeling paint on the walls. "Explain what exactly?" "That you're not Rosie Smith, but Rosalind Blackwell. That you've been lying to me since the day we met. I never meant to..." "To what? Get caught?" His voice cracked with emotion. "Was this entertaining for you? Slumming with the mechanic and his kid? Some kind of social experiment?" Tears filled her eyes. "No, it wasn't like that at all." "Then what was it like?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you created this whole fake persona. For what? Pity? Charity?" "For connection," she whispered. "Real connection. When people know who I am, they only see the money, the name. With you..." Her voice broke. "With you and Lily, I was just Rosie. Someone who could be loved for herself, not her bank account." "So, you built that connection on a lie." Nate's hands trembled. "Do you have any idea what our lives are like? The constant struggle, the worry. While you play at being ordinary, I'm figuring out how to keep a roof over our heads when your family's company kicks us out of this building." Rosie gasped. "I tried to stop that. I swear, I didn't know about the development until after we met." "But you knew for weeks and said nothing." The betrayal cut deeper than he'd expected. Every moment we shared, every conversation, you knew who you really were, and you chose to keep lying. "I was afraid." Tears streamed down her face. "Afraid of losing what we had." The shop door opened again, and Lily bounded in, back early from her sleepover. She froze, sensing the tension. "Miss Rosie? Why are you crying?" Lily looked between them, confused. "Rosie was just leaving," Nate said firmly. "But..." Rosie began. "Please," Nate cut her off. "Just go." Understanding dawned on Lily's face. "No, Miss Rosie can't leave." She ran to Rosie, wrapping her arms around her waist. Rosie knelt down, hugging Lily tightly. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I have to go now." "Why?" Lily's face crumpled. "Don't you like us anymore?" "I love you both," Rosie said, meeting Nate's eyes over Lily's head. "More than you know." As Rosie walked out the door, Lily burst into tears, running to her father. "Why did you make her leave? Why?" Nate held his daughter, his own eyes burning. Through the window, he watched Rosie's figure retreat down the street. No luxury car today. Just a woman walking away, shoulders shaking with sobs. Did I do the right thing, he wondered, his pride and hurt battling with the undeniable emptiness her absence immediately created. The memory of her words echoed, "I love you both, more than you know." The days after Rosie left felt endless to Nate. The eviction notice for the shop arrived officially. 30 days to vacate. A week later, another envelope appeared in his mailbox. Eviction from their apartment building, recently acquired by the same development company. 2 blows, perfectly timed to bring a man to his knees. "Where are we going to go, Daddy?" Lily asked one evening, her small voice carrying the weight of worries no child should bear. Nate forced a smile. "We'll figure it out, sweetheart. We always do." But the truth clawed at him. Their options were disappearing. He'd contacted every commercial property within 20 miles, but nothing was affordable. Without the shop, they'd have no income, and without income, no home. The spiral threatened to pull them under. Across town, Rosie paced her penthouse, her phone clutched in her hand. She'd left dozens of messages for Nate, each unanswered. The television played in the background, financial news droning on about market fluctuations and corporate acquisitions. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered to the empty room. She picked up her phone again, but this time didn't call Nate. Instead, she called the Blackwell Industries board secretary. "I need an emergency board meeting, tomorrow morning. Full attendance required." The Blackwell Industries boardroom buzzed with speculation. Emergency meetings were rare, especially ones called by Rosalind herself, who typically left such matters to Vincent. Vincent leaned toward her. "What's this about, Rosie? You're making us look unstable." She ignored him, waiting until every seat was filled, and the recording secretary signaled they were ready. Rosie stood, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I've called this meeting because I can no longer remain silent about certain business practices that violate not only my personal ethics, but potentially the law." The room went silent. A junior executive in the back discreetly activated his phone's camera. "Our urban development division has been systematically targeting vulnerable small businesses for acquisition and displacement, specifically focusing on areas where owners have limited resources to fight back." Her voice grew stronger. "These aren't just properties on a spreadsheet. They're people's lives, dreams, legacies." Vincent shot to his feet. "This is absurd. We're a business, not a charity." "Is it business to pay off building inspectors to find violations that don't exist? Is it business to spread rumors that damage reputations of small business owners who won't sell?" She pulled out a folder. "I have documentation of at least 12 cases, including detailed accounts of intimidation tactics authorized by my stepbrother." The board erupted in chaos. Vincent's face contorted with fury as Rosie continued, laying out evidence of his dealings. The junior executive's phone captured everything. "Effective immediately, I resign my position at Blackwell Industries," Rosie concluded. "I cannot be part of an organization that destroys lives for profit. I've already contacted the appropriate authorities regarding these violations." By evening, the footage had gone viral. "Blackwell heiress exposes corruption," trended across social media platforms. News vans gathered outside Blackwell headquarters, while financial analysts speculated about the company's future. Nate saw it first on the small television in his shop, unable to believe his eyes as Rosie, his Rosie, stood before a room of executives and sacrificed everything. "For people like Nate Harmon," she'd said, his name a caress even through the screen, "whose auto shop on Elm Street is scheduled for demolition, not because it's failing, but because it stands in the way of another luxury development." His phone rang, Marco from the diner next door. "You seeing this, man? She's talking about us." The pounding on Rosie's penthouse door came near midnight. She wasn't surprised to find Vincent there, his tailored suit rumpled, eyes wild with rage. "You stupid, ungrateful little..." He pushed past her into the apartment. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The board is calling for a full investigation. Our stock dropped 15 points." "Good," Rosie said calmly. "Maybe accountability will be good for business in the long run." Vincent laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "You think this changes anything? Your mechanic boyfriend is still finished. I made a call this afternoon. Demolition crews are going in tomorrow. Emergency permit. That shop will be rubble before sunset." Rosie's blood ran cold. "You can't do that. There are procedures." "Procedures?" Vincent stepped closer. "I own half the city council. While you were playing house with your grease monkey, I was building a real empire. His shop goes down tomorrow, and there's nothing you or your viral video can do about it." "Get out," Rosie whispered, reaching for her phone. Vincent grabbed her wrist. You've chosen the wrong side, little sister. When this is over, you'll have nothing. No company, no fortune, and certainly no mechanic. Rosie grabbed her keys and phone, her heart hammering against her ribs. Vincent's words echoed in her mind. Demolition crews are going in tomorrow. She had to warn Nate. She rushed from her penthouse, not bothering with makeup or even a proper coat despite the evening chill. The cab couldn't move fast enough through the city traffic. "Please hurry," she begged the driver. When they finally reached Nate's shop, the windows were dark, the closed sign hanging limply in the window. She pounded on the door anyway. "Nate, are you in there?" Only silence answered. "His apartment," she muttered, climbing back into the waiting cab. 212 Maple Street, please. Fast as you can." Across town, Nate paced in Rosie's building lobby, being blocked by a stern-faced doorman. "Sir, I've told you 3 times, Ms. Blackwell isn't accepting visitors. Please, just call up to her apartment," Nate insisted, running a hand through his disheveled hair. The viral video of Rosie, Rosalind, standing up to that boardroom full of executives had played on repeat in his mind. She'd mentioned him by name. She'd sacrificed everything. For him. For people like him. "I've been trying to reach her all evening," the doorman said with growing impatience. "She's not answering." Nate's shoulders slumped. He pulled out his phone and tried her number again, but it went straight to voicemail. "Rosie, it's me. I saw what you did. I need to see you. Please." Rosie stood outside Nate's apartment door, knocking until her knuckles hurt. A neighbor poked her head out. "He's not home, honey. Left in quite a hurry about an hour ago." Did he say where he was going? The woman shook her head, but he looked worried. Had his daughter with him. Lily. Of course. With the shop in danger, he'd make sure Lily was safe first. Rosie tried calling again, but Nate's phone went to voicemail. "Nate, it's me. Vincent is planning to demolish your shop tomorrow. Please call me back. Please." They crisscrossed the city like planets in separate orbits, never quite aligning. Nate left Rosie's building and tried her favorite coffee shop. Rosie, remembering Lily's best friend's mother, tracked down their address only to learn Nate had dropped Lily off, but hadn't stayed. As midnight approached, exhaustion and desperation drove Nate back to his shop. If it was coming down tomorrow, he needed to save what he could. His tools, his records, the photographs of Lily that hung in his office. He parked around back and used his key, not bothering with the lights. He'd worked in this space for so long he could navigate it blindfolded. But he wasn't alone. Voices came from his office, one soft and pleading, the other harsh and threatening. "You've ruined everything," Vincent's voice seethed. "Years of planning, destroyed because you fell for some grease monkey and his brat. Don't you dare talk about them like that." Rosie's voice was steady despite its softness. "It's over, Vincent. The authorities have your files. Nothing's over until I say it is." Something crashed, the sound of his filing cabinet toppling. Rosie cried out. Nate moved without thinking, bursting through the office door. The scene froze before him. Vincent gripping Rosie's arm, her back against the wall, his other hand raised. Around them, Nate's belongings were scattered. She'd been trying to pack his things. "Let her go." Nate's voice was deadly quiet. Vincent's head snapped toward him, momentary surprise replaced by sneering contempt. "The boyfriend arrives. How touching." "Nate," Rosie whispered, relief and fear mingling in her eyes. Vincent tightened his grip. "This doesn't concern you anymore. Your shop is finished. She's finished. You're all..." Nate crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbing Vincent's wrist and wrenching it away from Rosie. "I said, let her go." Vincent stumbled back, straightening his suit with forced dignity. "Assaulting me? That's a mistake. I'll add it to the lawsuit I'm filing tomorrow." "File whatever you want," Nate said, positioning himself between Rosie and Vincent. "But you're leaving now. Vincent's eyes darted between them, calculating. You're both pathetic. You think this changes anything? I still have connections you can't imagine. What I can imagine, Nate said, is how much worse that video of Rosie will look when people find out you came here and physically threatened her. I wonder if those authorities she mentioned would be interested in that. Vincent's face contorted with rage, but something in Nate's stance, the absolute certainty that he would protect Rosie at any cost, made him back toward the door. This isn't over, he spat. Yes, Nate said firmly, it is. After Vincent stormed out, Nate turned to Rosie, all his hurt and pride dissolving at the sight of her trembling hands. Are you okay? He asked softly. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. You came back. I never should have left. In the silence that followed Vincent's departure, Nate and Rosie stood facing each other in the cluttered office, the truth finally laid bare between them. The moonlight filtered through the blinds, casting striped shadows across their faces. I saw your video, Nate said, breaking the silence. What you did at the board meeting. Rosie wrapped her arms around herself. I couldn't be part of it anymore. Not after meeting you and Lily. You gave up everything. No, she said, her voice stronger now. I gave up what never really mattered. Nate ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion and emotion etched across his face. Why didn't you just tell me who you were from the beginning? Because for the first time in my life, someone was seeing me. Just me. Rosie took a tentative step toward him. Not the Blackwell fortune or the connections or the family name. Do you know what that feels like after a lifetime of people wanting you for everything except who you actually are? Her words hung in the air between them, raw and honest. I was afraid, she continued. Afraid that once you knew, everything would change. And I was right, wasn't I? Nate's shoulders slumped. My pride got in the way. I've spent so long doing everything myself, convinced I didn't need anyone's help. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with regret. I almost threw away the best thing that's happened to me since... He couldn't finish. Since your wife, Rosie said gently. He nodded. Lily hasn't smiled since you left. She keeps asking when you're coming back to finish her science project. His voice cracked. I don't think I've smiled either. Rosie closed the distance between them, her hand reaching for his. I'm so sorry I lied to you. I wanted to tell you so many times. I'm sorry I didn't give you the chance to explain. Nate's fingers intertwined with hers. I was hurt, but I should have listened. Where do we go from here? She whispered. Instead of answering, Nate pulled her into his arms. Their lips met in a kiss that spoke of forgiveness and new beginnings, of understanding that transcended their different worlds. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. I have some ideas, Nate said, a smile forming. Your business knowledge, my mechanical skills. We could build something together, something honest. A fresh start, Rosie agreed, her eyes bright with possibility. No more secrets. No more secrets, he echoed, sealing the promise with another kiss. The next morning, they stood hand in hand outside Lily's elementary school, waiting for the recess bell. When it rang and children poured onto the playground, Lily spotted them immediately. Her face transformed from surprise to pure joy as she ran toward them. Rosie! She squealed, launching herself into Rosie's open arms. You came back. I did, sweetheart, Rosie said, holding her tight. And I'm not going anywhere. Nate watched them, his heart full. We're going to be okay, he said, more to himself than anyone. All of us. Lily looked between them, her gap-toothed smile radiant. Does this mean we can finish my car project? Rosie laughed, reaching for Nate's hand while keeping her other arm around Lily. "That's just the beginning of what we're going to build together." 6 months later, the spring sun shone brightly on the freshly painted sign, Harmon Family Mechanics. What had once been a dilapidated building on the edge of town now stood proudly renovated, its large windows gleaming in colorful flower boxes welcoming visitors. A crowd had gathered for the grand opening, with community members, local officials, and former customers of Nate's old shop mingling in the parking lot. Lily, wearing a crisp blue dress with a matching ribbon in her hair, bounced on her toes beside the ceremonial red ribbon stretched across the entrance. "Can I cut it now?" she asked, her fingers tightening around the oversized scissors. Nate knelt beside her, adjusting her collar. "Almost, kiddo. Just waiting for Rosie to finish with the reporters." Rosie stood a few feet away, confidently explaining their business model to the local press. "Beyond repairs, we're creating a training program for disadvantaged youth interested in mechanical careers. Everyone deserves a chance to build their future." When she finished, she joined Nate and Lily at the ribbon. The three of them stood together as Mayor Jenkins delivered a short speech about small business revitalization. Nate squeezed Rosie's hand, still amazed at how they'd transformed his dream into something greater than he'd ever imagined. "And now," the mayor concluded, "I'll let the youngest Harmon do the honors." Lily stepped forward importantly, the scissors nearly as big as her arms. With determination on her face, she cut through the ribbon as the crowd cheered. Camera flashes captured the moment, her triumphant smile, Nate's proud gaze, and Rosie's joyful tears. As guests filtered into the shop for refreshments, a sleek black car pulled into the lot. Vincent Blackwell stepped out, looking thinner and less polished than before. The legal battles and public scrutiny had taken their toll. He approached Rosie cautiously. "Congratulations," he said, his voice lacking its former arrogance. "This is impressive." "Thank you for coming," Rosie replied, her tone civil but guarded. Vincent glanced at Nate, who stood protectively at Rosie's side. "I wanted to apologize. To both of you." He cleared his throat. "The plea deal is finalized next week. Community service and restitution to the businesses we harmed." "Including those mechanics scholarships?" Rosie asked pointedly. Vincent nodded. "Yes, everything you requested." He hesitated before adding, "Father would have been proud of you, Rosie. I never saw it before, but you're the true Blackwell." After Vincent left, the celebration continued into the evening. When the last guest departed, Nate, Rosie, and Lily returned to their new home, a modest but comfortable house with a large garage that Nate had converted into a workspace. Later that week, Nate and Rosie stood in that garage, a vintage Mustang's hood propped open between them. "So this connects to the..." Rosie pointed at the engine, deliberately mixing up parts she already knew. Nate smiled knowingly. "You don't need these lessons anymore. I've seen you explain carburetors to customers better than I do." "Maybe I just like having you close," she admitted, leaning into him. That night, after Rosie finished reading Lily's bedtime story, she found Nate waiting for her in the driveway. "Emergency repair?" she asked, seeing his old tow truck with its hood up. "Something like that." He guided her to the front of the truck, the exact spot where they'd first touched hands while looking at an engine. "This is where it all started," he said softly, reaching into his pocket. "Where I first felt something I thought was gone forever." As the stars appeared overhead, Nate knelt beside the engine and opened a small box containing a simple but elegant diamond ring. "Rosie Smith. Rosalind Blackwell. The woman who sees me exactly as I am." His voice trembled slightly. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks as he slipped the ring onto her finger. 1,000 times yes. They sealed their promise with a kiss beneath the hood of a truck, exactly where their journey had begun. If you enjoyed this story, I've found another special one just for you. Our community can't stop talking about how heartwarming and moving it is. Click on the video in front of you to experience this beautiful story before it's gone.